All right. Hey, everybody. Kelsey Komorowski here, founder of Como Consulting and the Framework for Academic Management. Welcome to our Skill Building 101 interview series. Each week, we're bringing on a different, very successful professional to share about their journey from classroom to college to career and the skills or lack thereof that shaped that journey. So today, we're in for a treat. We have Ashley Koen in the house, who is currently on lockdown in London, UK. We're recording this during quarantine. And Ashley has a super cool job as an academic program manager for a multi-billion-dollar global corporation. Total badass. And she is here to share with us her insights on her journey. So Ashley, I'm going to turn it right over to you. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And if you could just start, tell us a little bit about what your current role is, and then we'll go ahead and rewind it back a little bit.
Awesome. Yes, and thank you for inviting me for this interview as well. Yes, so as Kelsey mentioned, I'm based in London. I work for a company that's called Tableau. So it's a software company that creates a software for data visualization. So I work as the academic program manager, which means I manage all of the different academic relationships that we have here in Europe, but also in Middle East and Africa. That's my region, which is more half of the world than it is a
It's a big
region, but
region.
big region, yeah. But in doing that, I work with different higher education bodies to help them with identifying skills that the marketplace needs for their graduates and helping them to skill up on our software in order to make them more employable. But this goes beyond that. It has a lot to do with data literacy and just helping people understand the data that's all around them and being able to use that in their own lives, but also in their careers. So, in a nutshell, that's what I do here in London.
Love. Okay, Ashley, thank you so much for that. Also, this just goes a bit beyond the regular skill building because I think towards the end, if that's okay with you, I have a couple of questions just as far as it's so timely with respect to skill building during this time, both for within
Yeah.
school and then succeeding in the market, which is going to be more competitive than ever for jobs. So we can put a pin in that maybe and address that at the end just briefly. But for
Sure.
right now, I just want to get some conceptual clarity around a couple of the things that you share, just to make sure that people who aren't super familiar with data viz might wrap their heads around a bit better. So first of all, data, what is it? Visualization, data viz together, what is that? And then I think the third big piece was working with higher education institutions. If you could give some examples for that too.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the best way to explain data visualization, if you think about the copious amounts of news articles that we've all been seeing, not just recently, but on a daily basis, you'll see different charts that are interactive. So if you've ever come across, say, for example, a chart or a graph of a map, and you're able to click through and see different details and explore different aspects of that data, the software that creates that is the software that Tableau has created. So it allows people to really engage with data on a deeper level and also draw their own conclusions and insights from using a data set that you might find in an Excel document. So another example that we like to do at work for fun is to download our Netflix history, our viewing history.
Oh my gosh.
And then, yes, it can be very cringe, but downloading that and then plugging that into our software and just looking at the different trends, seeing how many hours you spend on Netflix, you might not want to do this. It can be very disheartening, but also entertaining to see, which shows that you tend to watch the most. But things like that, like data is all around us. It doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't have to be something that you're doing as an analyst for a business. It can really just be the things that you're doing every day. So for data visualization, it's ways of looking at, engaging with, and understanding that data, if that provides a bit more clarity. Um,
Absolutely. And so just kind of at a very simple level,
mhm.
data is referring to information, correct?
Yes,
Like pieces of
yes.
information, whether it's numeric or otherwise.
Hmm.
And the Netflix example, I think, really brings it home because it's true. Normally, that word has a very academic or professional connotation when we think about data. So to bring it down to being like, actually, you're engaging with data all the time, every day, regardless of whether or not you're aware of it. To be aware of
Yes,
it and build out that kind of explicit fluency around it, obviously better, but we'll get to that, I'm sure.
yes,
No, that's
yeah.
that's great. Okay, so data visualization, literally like different cool ways of representing information, whether it's in graphs or maps or things like that.
Yes, yeah. And then to your piece about working with higher education institutions, primarily I work with universities and colleges, specifically with instructors, looking to a lot of instructors have been teaching these courses for a long time. And as you know, the labor market changes rapidly and education doesn't necessarily catch up at the same speed. So part of what we do is not necessarily an intervention, but a support system to come in and say, hey, okay, your students need skills in data analytics or visualization, critical thinking. Here, this is how we can help you by designing curriculum, showing them best practice of how to incorporate it in the classroom, and also, designing online e-learning activities and things like that for instructors and students to be able to upskill and be more competitive in the marketplace. So that's a little bit more detail on my relations with universities.
Fantastic. Like basically the most important thing going right now as far as in our space of online learning and building up those skills. That's fantastic. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's what you're doing right now. If we zoom out a little bit, did grade 12 Ashley, was she like, I'm going to live in London and I'm going to work for a data visualization software company? Was that the goal, or were there other things that came first that led to this?
Oh my
What was
goodness.
high school Ashley all about?
Yeah, so not in my wildest dreams would I probably have envisioned this. And up until working for a software company, I absolutely thought that I would never work for a software company. I considered myself a very kind of qualitative person, the person who likes, stories and explaining things with words and looking at colors and shapes and things like that, like a very kind of, I guess, creative or minded human being, and didn't really think that there would be a place for me in a software company. But that's sort of the lesson that I've taken with me since grade 12 is everything that I thought that I wanted to do or thought wasn't accessible to me ended up being a really interesting exercise in understanding that there's so much more than those typical job descriptions that you see.
That's okay. So that's super interesting. First off, just a fantastic insight for anyone in grade 12, either feeling like I don't know what I need to do yet, like, or I'm going to do this exactly. Like it will seldom actually unfold the way that you're thinking. So take comfort in deep breaths. And then actually with that, if I can ask, so was it the notion of you not feeling like that's not for me, right? That's not a career path or a field of study that I would study. Like I'm more creative. Do you think was that shaped by, like you said, kind of like your understanding of what jobs were available in those fields? Was that shaped by broader kind of just like the way that you were socialized? Like what had you in your head? Because, and this, so many students in high school and college, and honestly, a lot of adults too, they have those very predetermined ideas of that's not for me. I'm not that type of person. So
Yeah,
for you, where did that come from?
I think at least when I was in grade 12, there was very much an emphasis on this like fixed mindset of you choose a career, you follow that, and you do all the steps that you need to do to get there. And when I was in grade 12, I really didn't know what I wanted to do yet. I thought that I knew what I wanted to do, but
And
looking
what was
back,
that, if I can ask?
I wanted to be a journalist. So I went to school for communications, which I did do, and it has influenced every single job that I've had since then, but in very unpredictable ways. Um, but in following that fixed kind of path that I thought I wanted to go ahead for myself, I thought that I had to check a number of boxes, but really every job that I've had, even though it's been very different from the last one, it's all given me such amazing experience in the next role, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And if anything, that's kind of a really interesting common theme that's come out in the last few interviews. Like, I didn't intend to be doing XYZ, but just kind of
mhm.
taking one experience at a time and embracing whatever experience you felt was best for you in the moment. That has a funny way of then generating, kind of your journey in a way that you might not have expected. So for you, if it was from high school looking at, I want to be a journalist, communications. So tell us, where did you go to school and what was your degree in?
So I studied at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, and I did a double major in sociology and communications. And then after that, I went on to study my master's degree, in which I took a more political focus in human rights, figuring that this would be something that would lead me overseas to be reporting on stories, which it did lead me overseas. However, I ended up in a very different path as you know, working in education and then eventually ending up here working for a software company. Not sure how that happened, but
Let's try to get to the bottom of it, like in the next
yeah,
20 minutes.
yeah. um,
Uh,
I think the main takeaway, though, and I was reflecting on this before our interview, is the thing that I found having interviewed recently in the past year, just moving to London in August, having gone through the interview process again, which I hadn't for a number of years before that because I was in a job. So it was interesting to see what their emphasis was on and what they were looking for. And I found that even though nothing on my resume would indicate to them that I could A, work for a software company, or B, become proficient in that software because I had no experience with it, um, they really looked at my skills, things that I identified as something that carried me through each of those roles. So I guess what you would call transferable skills. Number one being communication, and the second one being creativity. So really looking at how you can problem solve in unique situations and make the best of it. I think that that sort of resilience is something that employers look for, and that doesn't come from one particular job description. I think you can gain that in pretty much any single job that you've had. Even referencing back to part-time jobs that I've had, I think I learned a lot from those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So I want to just pause here to kind of unpack some of that a little bit and really emphasize that last piece first, in that if you are in grade 9 or grade 12 or second year university or a fresh grad, it's never too early or too late to start documenting and reflecting based on whatever job, internship, things that you're doing, tracking out the skills that you're using. Because Ashley, like, this is something I'm so happy that you brought this up. Like, a lot of those words that you just shared as far as communication, creativity, problem solving in different contexts, this all sounds well and good. And I've seen a lot of resumes and talked with a lot of students who will say these things. And then it's like, that's fantastic. What does it look like? Give me an example. And there is a fundamental lack of ability to communicate in very precise, meaningful, compelling language about what those things, creativity, problem solving, what that actually looks like, which obviously the ability to communicate that is key to showing that you have it. So can you speak a little bit about that? Like, did you, from years ago, were you in the habit of kind of adding to your resume and, taking time to reflect on what skills am I using? What does it look like? Or was this something that leading up to this kind of different software endeavor that you were like, I need to look back and bring this all up to speed for this particular role?
I actually have a master resume that I call it, that lives in my computer and has been passed on from computer to computer, where I've
I
documented
love that it lives in there.
Yeah, it lives in the cloud. But I have it as kind of this one massive record of everything that I've done. And I've kept every single job in there, even if it was working at a coffee shop or a volunteer gig, anything like that. I've kept it all in there and tried to identify along the way different skills and experiences that I had from those different jobs or different volunteer jobs. And I found that it's been really helpful when you go to pare down your resume for a specific job that you're looking for, and you're pulling out the experience that you think might be relevant and timely, and going over and seeing, oh, wow, okay, so this is something that I might not include on my resume, but the fact that I lived on an alpaca farm and collected urine samples in the rain could be an example of resiliency that you might want to share in an interview. Very strange example, I know, but that's true.
I would have loved to be a fly in the wall in that interview as you're talking about collecting urine samples from an alpaca farm. That's amazing. Yeah. So,
but just little things like that, like that's something where you can draw, and it also gives you a lot more, personality and insight into the human being that you are beyond, the buzzwords that you list on your resume. Not saying that that's a perfect example, but that's the first one that came to my head.
Okay. That is, to me, a perfect example, first of all. Second of all, I want to highlight what you said about having a master resume and customizing it to different jobs. You guys, anyone listening, it is a non-negotiable that you customize your resumes. I know some people that they're like, yeah, my resume, I'll send it off. If you're not customizing it, don't bother. Honestly, don't bother sending it out. It's not going to happen if you can't take a few minutes of time and effort and energy to research the company, customize your resume accordingly. Like, it's not for you. That's first and foremost. Yeah. And then second, Ashley, I love that it lives in your computer. We did a resume workshop a bit ago with a director from Columbia Business School, and she had all sorts of fantastic resume insights. But one of the big things, because I got a lot of high school students who are like, what do I have to, I don't have one. And it's like, if you're doing any extra, if you're a person who does stuff, right, from when you hit grade 9, grade 10, create that master document. Okay, it
Yes,
lives in your computer
absolutely.
and you can just update it. It's very low stakes. And then you can take a few minutes now and again to really think about, identify what those skills. And to your point about the alpaca thing, like a lot of, especially high school, university, there are a lot of hobbies that can develop.
Mm-hmm.
And again, having a critical eye with what skills am I using in those hobbies? Like if you're a horseback rider, that's one thing. If you're learning languages outside of school, just because it's, there's so many different ways that you can be building skills outside of formal academics or outside of formal internships. And that all
Absolutely.
belongs on that master resume.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, so I'm getting overly excited about all of these things. So let me just rein it in a little bit and give it back. So let's take it back to university.
Okay.
So when you finished university, was it right away you knew you wanted to go get a master's, or was it I'm gonna do something else first, and why? Like, what was the criteria for kind of what you did as soon as you were done your undergrad?
I felt that I still had a lot of inquiry left in terms of things that I wanted to study and explore. I got really into sociology near the end of my degree and journalism, and really wanted to look at I was trying to identify something that would make my resume or my experience unique in the field, which, if you know anything about journalism, is a very difficult thing to achieve. However, I thought that, pursuing human rights, which was a big interest of mine at the time and still is, would be able to give me the context and the ability to then take what I'd learned and start to work in the field. So it was a pretty straightforward decision. It was something that I had been considering. I did take an extra semester off in between where I worked to make sure that this is what I really wanted, and researched all of my different options in terms of where to study, who had the best programs, and that sort of thing. So it wasn't like a rash decision, but I did do it pretty quickly after university within a year.
Okay, okay. So
Mm-hmm.
that was a fairly kind of linear, let's do this next step. And then you ended up in where for your master's?
Yes, so I ended up in Scotland, and I studied at the University of Glasgow, and that basically started my love affair with the UK, which explains why I'm back here nearly X amount of years later. Won't name those
Yeah, I
years,
was gonna say
but
very small, very small. Yeah.
yes.
So why, if I can ask, why Scotland? So there's a lot of domestic versus international studies. There's exchange opportunities. What made you decide to take the plunge and go full out study there and get your master's degree there?
Yeah, at the time, actually, there was only, within Ontario at least, there was only one newly formed human rights program, and I think it was a human rights law program. So I didn't have a ton of options locally. I also knew, having spent the year prior to that on exchange and traveling, that I wanted to keep traveling. And so I thought I could combine those two things together. And the programs in the UK, there was much more in terms of options, as well as the reputation of some of the programs really appealed to me because they've been around for quite a long time and had some pretty cool people involved. So that was pretty much what led my decision. But I didn't really have a lot of options at the time at home. I know that there are a lot more now because I've kind of followed that over the years just to see what sprung up. And I know that there's more in that field there now. But at the time, it was the best option to go overseas.
Gotcha. Okay. So you go overseas, you earn your master's in human rights.
Mm-hmm.
And at that stage, are you thinking you're wanting to launch a career in journalism with a specialty on human rights? Was that kind of the same trajectory?
Yeah, my plan actually at that point was to work for the United Nations.
I love it.
That was my lofty pie in the sky goal. But turns out so did everybody else in my program, and hundreds of other people in political science as well. So I ended up actually from there going to, yep, ended up going from there and working for a nonprofit overseas, which was a really cool experience. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if it wasn't for my master's degree, even though it wasn't technically required for the position. It was more so having that experience and showing that I had been up to study in a different country and can live on my own and that sort of thing. So,
And that's huge too, as far as a lot of people, or if there's that desire of like, I want to go abroad or I want to work abroad, which is
mm-hmm.
fantastic, right? I think there's I can't think of a greater gift, honestly, than travel, learning different languages, whatever. It opens up whole
Absolutely.
other worlds to you. That's a whole other tangent that we won't go down right
Yeah.
now. But I think having, as far as making decisions when you're thinking about, and traveling is a perfect example. If you're thinking, I would love to work internationally one day, then having in mind what are some decisions you can make, because one day will come, right? And if
Mm-hmm.
you're not strategic about making sure that you are indeed equipped and have that background to show I am ready to work internationally because I've done a year abroad or a term or an exchange or something like that, like you quite intentionally, from what I'm hearing, built out a profile that would then
Mm-hmm.
enable you to be like, even if I'm not hitting XYZ harder skills, look, I've got this software, I can travel, I'm flexible, I'm adaptable, you can put me in the field, I'll be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say never underestimate the skills that come with that. And I know if you're in high school, you probably haven't started any sort of long-term big traveling yet. Maybe that's not in your plans, but even if it does become part of what you do, if you go on a semester abroad or a year abroad, whatever it is, remember that that's incredible experience. And if I hadn't gone on exchange in university, I don't think that I would have thrived as much as I did living abroad for 2 years in Scotland, never mind then moving to East Africa after that on my own. So you can start small. You can start within, the confines of a study abroad program that's very structured, gives you, two legs to stand on. But I would say never underestimate those things because they really do um, not only change the way that you appear to a potential employer, but it's just the life skills that you get from that, the independence and the ability to, exist on your own and make decisions and the problem solving that comes from traveling alone. I'm sure, Kelsey, you can relate to this anytime you're in an airport in a foreign country and something goes wrong. Those skills come into play massively um, in those situations. So always something to keep in mind. It's not always black and white.
Definitely. No, not at all. And you know what? I would go one step further. Yes, having travel experiences, building those out, if that's something you're
Mm-hmm.
interested in, is one thing. But even if it's not something you're interested in, having some sort of international experience or immersing yourself in a different place, just outside of your comfort zone, is there's nothing that you can learn or buy or do outside of that extremely authentic experience that gives you that same sort of what am I actually capable of, and
Mm-hmm.
that stays long after you go back. So even if you don't want an international career, right, at
Mm-hmm.
all, but if you want to learn more about your resilience, about your resourcefulness, about these things, then having these international experiences, that just makes you that much better to navigate life in general when you are home, right? Even in your home turf.
Yeah. And I would
Uh,
say too, even if international travel isn't your thing, just joining a new group where you don't know anyone or joining a community group, these things kind of trigger the same skills in a different way without, being stranded in a different country. But it still encourages you to have an open mind, to get to know people, to be independent, to be resilient, to make judgment calls. I think that you can have that experience closer to home if it's not available to you to go abroad. And luckily in Canada, we're so multicultural. We have so many opportunities to be able to learn from different cultures and experiences and people and things like that. So I think the same principle applies.
Yeah, I love that. And for our listeners in the States, it's the same thing, right? If you're like, well,
Hmm.
there's no multiculturalism, I'm in a homogeneous little town, in southern US, whatever. I think actually I love that point that you made. Basically, getting outside of your comfort zone, if you are willingly putting yourself in a place of discomfort, because
Hmm.
we know that is where genuine growth and skill building happens, that's still quite invaluable into itself. So I love that point on that.
Absolutely.
So getting back to your very international and wide-reaching journey here. So after you got your master's, earned your master's, what was the role that you landed in East Africa? Who was that with? What was that doing?
It was with a nonprofit organization that's based in Canada called Journalists for Human Rights. So it was a group that was looking to work with different journalism organizations in Tanzania specifically and help them to build out some of their programs. I specifically was placed at a university, so this is what started my kind of foray into the teaching world, working with journalism students, helping to develop curriculum, teaching courses and things like that. So that's what I did in Tanzania, which was pretty amazing, but probably the most out of my comfort zone I've ever been.
I can imagine. I'm just thinking we should do a whole separate interview series or a one-off on just travel adventures slash
Oh yeah,
misadventures,
yeah.
because there's a lot to be said about that. But for right now, so after or in Tanzania,
Hmm.
because this kind of was that what started you on the more teaching path? So like
Yeah.
how essentially what was that next stage after you, or I don't like how did it wrap up with this nonprofit in Tanzania?
Yeah, so it was a 6-month contract that was sponsored by the Canadian government, some funding program. So it wasn't something that you were able to stay on, but that experience allowed me to go on and continue teaching abroad. I ended up moving to South Korea to teach for a while. And then when I ended up back in Canada, I started working with international students. And then that progressed into teaching international students, and then ultimately working at the college in Toronto, where I was directing the writing center and also working with different staff to help them develop their teaching skills. So teaching has been a very strong um, theme in my life, not something I ever thought I was going to do. But I think sometimes, especially with me, it's something that I kept finding myself going back to, something that came naturally. And it wasn't something that I identified as one of my, top skills when I was 18, but it's something that I learned along the way.
And that's so just to zoom out a little bit, because I love the name of the nonprofit you worked for, Journalists for Human Rights. That's literally merging what you were saying, like the two
Yes.
things from undergrad and grad that you wanted to do was exactly that,
Yeah.
which is like uncanny. But from there, the teaching piece, because you're not, and I don't say this as a bad way, I like, but you're not a certified educator, right? It's not like I'm
Correct.
going to be a teacher, so I'm going to go to teachers college and do this.
Hmm.
Was it more that just the actual practice of teaching came natural, you started building out that experience and essentially rolled with it? Like, let me ask you this, was it a I'm going to go be a teacher, or was it kind of happened and then you realized, I'm kind of an educator now at this point, or was it a bit of both?
Yeah, so that's something that especially after I left Tanzania and started teaching in Korea, where you don't need to have a teacher's college degree to be able to teach there. You do need to have a master's degree, however. So in some cases, I wouldn't say that they're the same thing, but they represent the same level of education that some places are looking for in terms of educators. But I did battle with that for a few years after, thinking, do I need to go to teachers college to solidify my role as a teacher? And I decided not to, because the experience that I had gained and the different things that I had been doing while working as a teacher was a lot of the same thing that you would get from teachers college. And not to say that I was able to, do that completely on my own and there was no need for it. It was just another investment of my time and money and energy that I found I was able to gain that experience outside of it. Um, and again, looking at different roles, in order for me to teach at a college, I needed to have a master's degree, but not necessarily teacher's college. But I have battled with that at some point, thinking like, oh, okay, am I like a fraud in some senses now because, I'm not certified to teach in Ontario, for example. But I really think that uh, the world is becoming a lot more flexible with things like that, and experience really does mean a lot more than a degree.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And that goes back even to one of your initial statements as far as, it's not this fixed, go get a degree in X so that you do your career in X, right?
Hmm.
It's much more kind of an amalgam of like, what are your skills, what are your interests, and what might those look like as far as
Yeah.
like a career path. That's so interesting. And that's really important, I think, too, just for anyone listening. Like, if you know that if you have career paths or jobs in mind that you're interested in, to take some time and get a little creative about what are different ways to get there, right? Like, because it's not always that linear, oh, I'm going to be an educator, go to teachers college. Ashley, your story illustrates that beautifully, right? To get the master's degree and have gotten in that sense. So you were teaching in South Korea. Was how did paint us a picture of essentially from teaching in South Korea to applying for, when you dug out your master resume and you're like, I'm going to apply for the software company that I never thought I would ever be suited for. How did that happen? It seems
Yeah,
like a big jump.
Well, yeah. And I mean, there were other jobs in between that for sure. But it's interesting because I have referenced my teaching in Korea in this job quite a bit. I'm actually working on an initiative right now with our marketing program, developing data literacy for kids, for students who are,
Love that.
yes, I know, amazing. So we're working on that, and I've been using all of the lesson planning and the different ways that I know how to identify age groups for planning activities. And I've been doing that now in my day-to-day job. And never did I think that my teaching experience in Korea would ever come into play, but it really has, and in so many different ways. But yeah, it is definitely a big jump. But to your point, if I were to ask my colleagues in the office, when we were in the office, what they did and what they studied, I know, for example, one of our marketing managers has a degree in Russian literature. Someone else who works,
Whoa.
yeah, someone else who works as an analyst went to university to study music, classical theory. So these, I think software companies are actually becoming a bit of a hotbed for a mixed bag in terms of what you've done in the past, and they like to draw from those different experiences too. Not something that I expected, nor do I think that that's what the popular opinion is of software companies. People probably don't realize that, but I
No, I
think
would say not.
the takeaway is really not to limit yourself in that way. You really never know.
So can we tease out a little bit about what that means practically?
Hmm.
For high school or college, or again later, like learners at different stages are at different places with their educational or career journey. But let's maybe like move forward a little bit. You had some other jobs from teaching in South Korea, but the decision to essentially, I don't know if it's when you applied to Tableau or if it was before then, but like did you kind of have a talk with yourself of like these are the types of jobs that are open to me that I'm qualified for? Or was it, maybe you could just like walk us through a bit of your process, because I think that's so important. Like if you hadn't had that thought of, yeah, I could do this, like I have transferable skills that speak to this, you wouldn't have applied.
Right.
And right, so how can we kind of set ourselves up to even put our foot forward into the places or spaces that we could really thrive in?
Yeah, and I think especially when I was first moving to the UK, I really set aside a bunch of different jobs, looking at different job opportunities that were with universities. I kind of pigeonholed myself, knowing that I had worked for higher education, was comfortable there, understood how it worked, and that was going to be available to me here in London. But as I was thinking about this and reflecting, I realized that I really wanted to work for a company that had more of a creative kind of startup approach where it was flexible and imaginative and there wasn't all the bureaucracy that can sometimes happen in higher education institutions
All the
all the time. Yes. So I really pushed myself to say, where exactly do I want to work? What do I want my life to look like? What do I want my, 9 to 5, so to speak, to look like? What kind of joy do I want to bring from this job? And that's when I started to look at tech companies and software companies and startups and things like that, and trying to see if they had an angle that I could work with. And that's where I found out, with the academic program. So that was, something that could obviously felt very relevant to what I had done, but I wasn't sure how I was going to present to the people that were interviewing me, considering my background was so different. But I think just putting yourself out there and focusing on the things that you want and the quality of life that you want, the things that you want to take away from your job that isn't necessarily what you're doing every single day, can be a different lens to view your, career prospects.
A different lens, but also I would argue an essential lens that I think
Yeah.
a lot of people don't have yet. But to your point, like it's increasingly becoming the norm, and that's
Hmm.
something that I wish we could like broadcast this from the rooftops. That exercise, Ashley, that you did, and this is something that anyone can do, right?
Hmm.
Any age. It's about, and flesh this out if I'm missing anything, but from what I'm understanding, it's not about what do I want to do. It's not even about who do I want to be. It's how do I want to feel,
Hmm.
and that's so important as far as what do I, day to day, week to week, how am I going to feel my very best, what's important to me as far as the day to day.
Yeah.
So for that, like just on a practical level, was that like a list that you brainstormed out? Was this like a mind map, or was this just like a kind of in your head thinking about it?
Yeah, no, I actually I read a book that is about design thinking. And so it takes principles of design that engineers might use to build something, and you apply that to your life. So you pinpoint the things in your day-to-day life that, not to quote Marie Kondo, but bring you joy, things that make you feel good, and the place where you can identify what you would call like your zone of genius. I'm sure you've heard of this before. But for me, that's the time when I'm working when I don't notice time passing because I'm so enthralled, I'm so into it, and I love what I'm doing that 3 hours can go by in 2 seconds. And so I really tried to isolate those things and looking at the skills that I had, but also the experiences that I had in all of my jobs and volunteer work where I felt happiest. And that involved, working one-on-one with students and instructors, being in an environment that was collaborative, but also the sky was high. There was no limit to what you could do. And being able to have, a work environment where I felt comfortable. Those were things that I pinpointed, and that's what I used to do my job search. So there was a bit of work there, but I think it was important reflective work that we don't really take time to do enough. Especially once you've had several years of career under your belt, you think, okay, this is where I'm going and this is how I get there. But I think it's really important. And I think that this opportunity, or sorry, this situation that we're in globally right now is an opportunity to do that, is to really reflect and say, okay, what is important to me and what do I want to value?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'm cognizant of our time. I promise just like 2 or 3, maybe 4 more minutes. But
Sure.
that's so important, and it's very our brains are very lazy by default, right?
Hmm.
Everyone's is. Most people, we're always thinking, but very seldom, unless we're literally deliberately putting on that critical thinking hat, it's not happening.
Right.
So to have that decision be quite explicit and conscious of like, I'm going to reflect on this, I'm going to think about this, even just that is huge, and kind of sets you apart in some pretty critical ways as far as setting yourself up, like the life that you end up living. And a lot of us, we have parents, we have teachers, we have a lot of people in our network chiming in, and I think it's really easy for expectations to get conflated with what we think
Hmm.
is expected of us or what we think is available to us versus what we want for ourselves. So even there, to just kind of eliminate the noise and go inwards and just listen to like what's coming up just for you,
Yeah.
is quite invaluable. And again, that could be whether you're in grade 10, grade 12, or if you're a parent. It's quite illuminating, I think, the stuff that can come out from that.
100%. And make no mistake, it is hard work. It's hard work to sit there. It's that lack of comfort zone that we're talking about. It can be uncomfortable to confront those things and to really think about what you want instead of just listening to what you think you should be doing. So it's not necessarily an easy thing, but I think it's important, and it's something that allows you to take a little bit more control of your own happiness, your own destiny, so to speak.
Totally, and to quite literally create a different future. Like Ashley, I
Hmm.
think everything you've shared, it's not paying lip service to, oh, you should do this, you should do that. Like you're quite living the proof of you have this incredible job in London, you're loving it, and it's because you did put in that extra work, and now your entire life, literally how you're spending your days, how you're earning money, like those things have drastically shifted as a
Hmm.
result of you having put in that work. So I want to highlight that. That's a very concrete and inspiring example, I think, of what can come when you
Yeah,
prioritize your own thinking and decision making, and
for
carving out
sure.
that journey. That's great.
The payoff is
Um,
worth it.
yeah, no kidding. So, okay, so Ashley, just 2 more questions for you.
Sure.
Number one, if you're looking back from high school, Ashley, all the way through to now, what would you say is the one skill or the one mindset or attribute that really determined kind of how your journey took place, for better or worse? Whether you had a lot of it or you were lacking it, what would you say was the number one?
Ooh, that's a good one. I would say making the conscious shift to having an open mind. I heard something, I was in a program a few years ago working with other educators, and someone said something to me about if someone has an idea or has an opinion that you don't agree with, assume it for 2 minutes. So take that idea, take that opinion, and try to flesh out exactly where they're coming from. Pretend that that's your opinion for 2 minutes. And that was something that has stuck with me, but I think I was practicing that before that too. Just it was finally put into words, but really just having an open mind. And I think allowing what you might see as a challenge, looking at that as an opportunity as well. even though my path from high school to where I am now might seem really fun in this, 10-minute roundup here, but really there were a lot of opportunities that I really wanted, couldn't seize, or I did and I didn't get them. But it doesn't mean that I, did something wrong or something failed. It just means that it wasn't where I was supposed to be at that time. So, um, just having an open mind and seeing, okay, if this isn't working out, then what else can I put in its place? And oftentimes it turned out to be better than I expected.
Yes. And all of that stemming from the open mind.
Yes,
I love
that's what I
that.
would say. Yeah.
That is so awesome. Okay, thank you for that. And then just as far as like you are, I think the personal like data literacy, how we can build that. We talked about this just briefly at the outset. If we can just spend a moment on, one or two kind of insights as far as why is this so important for learners of all ages as far as part of their foundational skill set to be building out. Why should they care? And then importantly, what's like one thing that they can do to start down that path of acquiring the skill?
For sure. So data literacy is incredibly important. It's not just being able to, understand or see what data means. It's about being able to use it to generate it. So this could be like, looking through results of a survey, for example, or being able to understand a complicated graph. You might see these things in your math lessons or even science and think, okay, I can kind of get what I need to get from here, but you want to take that one step further. You want to be able to critically evaluate the data that you're looking at, to question it, and to be able to understand the visualizations that you're seeing.
Why?
Data, why? Because data is genuinely one of the most important things in the world right now, if not the most important, in my opinion. It is collected everywhere, every minute, every day, from everything from your cell phones to everything that you do online. Everybody knows about targeted Instagram ads. That's, one example of how your data is being collected and used against you, so to speak. But there's a statistic, and I'll have to give you the correct number, but off the top of my head, it's something about over 80% of the jobs that students who are in university right now are going to be going into don't actually exist yet, because it's about using this data and creating all of these different positions that we can't even fathom what they look like. The same way that you wouldn't expect that there would be a social media manager, for example, 10 years ago.
Yeah. Oh,
So
wow.
yeah. And in terms of, exploring data and getting used to it, I would say one of the best things to do, like the Netflix example, is start looking at your own data. Make a list of all the data that's being captured on your own personal activities. So if you see on your cell phone, it'll tell you, your screen time is up or down from this week or last week. You can look at your app usage. That's a really great way to, break down how you're spending your time. Again, this can be a little depressing since we're all stuck at home and probably spending more time on our computers and cell phones. But it's a really interesting way to be able to see, how much data is being collected on me, and also what does this mean? How much of my, time am I spending doing this?
I love that. And I hope anyone listening to this go test that out, because there's probably some frightening realizations of why
Oh
data
yeah.
matters and why we should really care about it on quite a visceral
Mm-hmm.
level. That's awesome. And then just to kind of bring it full circle to what you shared at the very beginning with those transferable skills, even that you brought to bear when you first applied, the same skills in building out, because we talk about skill sets a lot. We talk about a foundational skill set.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys, building out data literacy, when you understand and can articulate what critical thinking looks like, communication, even time management, and then especially executive functioning, metacognition are kind of two big ones. That facilitates the ability to acquire data literacy a lot more efficiently. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so just as far as that relationship between our more foundational versus this other thing, that stat is crazy, by the way. I'm going to be looking that up after. I believe it. I've read about
Yeah.
the majority, like I've heard that before, the majority of jobs that students in high school, university are going to be doing don't exist,
I'll
which
have
is
to get the
just,
correct number for you, but I used this recently in a conversation that I had, and I just can't recall off the top of my head, but
I will, yeah, send it
it's
over. I'll
real.
also, yeah, it is real. Send it over. I'll post that into the group.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, Ashley, that is it. Thank you so much for your time. Are there any final parting words, insights, advice that you would give to any of our learners tuning in who are in this whole world of uncertainty right now?
Yes. Well, I would say, first of all, take a deep breath. You're all doing your best. And I think that really, we're in an opportunity right now, like I said before, to do some reflection. If you feel that you have the mental space and capacity to do that, I would encourage you to. And remember that, nothing is linear, nothing is straightforward. If my path can be any example of that, it doesn't mean that if you don't land that first job that you think you want, working for the UN, doesn't mean that you're not going to end up doing something that you love later. So keep an open mind and really just try to explore within yourself what it is that you want. I think that's where you're going to end up being the happiest.
That's awesome and very timely. If you can't go out there, go within. That's
Yeah,
awesome. Ashley, thank you so much again for your time.
thank
Everybody,
you.
that is it for today. Ashley, yeah, this was absolutely fantastic. And everybody, we will see you next Thursday at 5 p.m., which is the regular time. Obviously, Ashley is in good old UK, so we moved it up a bit today.
Yes, thank you.
But yeah, of course, of course. All right. I wish everyone a really safe and happy weekend, and we will see you in our next video. Ashley, take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.